So in this lecture, we are going to be looking at another one of the cultural universals that seems to be pervasive in all human societies or all human cultures, the notion of religion or some sort of belief in the supernatural, right? And we're going to look at, both complex religions as well as more traditional religions, as well as religions that occur when you have two major religions that come together and a third one is formed out of that religion, something that we refer to as a syncretic religion. So the central questions that we'll be dealing with in this lecture is, of course, what is religion versus what is the supernatural? What tools do anthropologists use to study religion? How is religion a system of both meaning as well as power within culture? And how is globalization changing religion? So from a very basic standpoint, no matter what culture you're looking at, whether we're looking at Trobriand islanders in Southeast Asia or we're looking at Yanomamo tribal people in the Venezuela, Brazil, or we're looking at the United States, right? Each culture, in essence, has some form of spiritualism or religion, right? Every culture has religious specialists, no matter what size the culture, whether you're dealing with a large, complex religion with hundreds of religious specialists, or you're dealing with a small local village shaman, right? Each culture in each human group has its own religious specialist. So religion itself consists of rational actors committing rational acts, right? So in essence, what we're saying here is that religion is responding to some very real needs that occur within society in terms of people's mental and emotional fulfillment, right? So it's a rational act in the sense that it fulfills a very real societal need. So when we look at the natural versus the supernatural worlds, we can make a very, very basic distinction, right? Anything that lies outside of clear scientific explanation can be referred to as supernatural. If we look at one of our earliest researchers, our earliest anthropologists who looked at religion from a cultural perspective, he says that religion may have developed as a means to explain the natural phenomenon that are not readily explained by observable evidence. So what Turner was saying here was that religion is seeking to explain things that we cannot find absolute scientific or rational explanations for. So religion and supernatural as a rational interpretation of natural events, right? So what Victor Turner also looked into was what was really the history of the development of religion, right? And what he said was, well, some of these earliest religions that occurred in the Middle East, at least ones that we have written kind of historical records for or archaeological records for, a lot of the religious notions or a lot of the kind of religious events that are outlined in their histories correspond to real natural events that occurred. So these religions were actually seeking to explain the rationale or the reasoning behind why some of these natural events did occur. Things like floods. At one point, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers reversed flows. So in essence, there were, these natural events they were seeking to explain. So in other words, the supernatural is a belief in an order of existence outside of the observable universe, right? It's associated with death cross-culturally. All forms of burial rites and rituals have some form of supernatural or religious element in them. And religion and supernatural beliefs work to reinforce cultural expectations as well as gender roles. So one of the earliest anthropologists to look at religion, along with Victor Turner, actually a little bit earlier than Victor Turner, was E.B. Tyler, right? He's the gentleman, if you remember, that gave us our kind of most comprehensive definition of culture. And he proposed this notion called animism, right? That objects, places, and creatures all possess a distinct spiritual essence. Or, in other words, animism is the belief that all objects, places, and creatures all possess some sort of distinct spirit, right? So animism perceives all things, animals, rocks, rivers, weather systems, human handiwork, and even perhaps words as animated and alive and consisting of their own kind of personalities, their own kind of actions. So the kind of belief in animism today is generally retained to tribal, ethnic religions and kind of smaller cultures that we see, some tribal groups in sub-Saharan Africa as well as South America. Today, when we do kind of a global or an attempt at getting a global number of how many people adhere to animism as a form of religion, it's at least around 100 million. And of course, animists, like we said before, believe in certain inanimate objects possess spirits or souls, right? So mostly natural objects, and each tribe has its own unique characteristics that it assigns to kind of these creatures or these souls or these inanimate objects that are alive. So here we're looking at the Kung Bushman, and we're looking at a shaman here. And in particular, this individual's practicing a animistic ritual, right? He believes that the grass, the smoke, and the flame that's being used to kind of stoke the smoke is all possesses a specific spirit, right? And in a lot of different cultures, particularly in this one and what we're seeing here, is this practice of kind of smoke purifying or smoke washing. In essence, the spirit contained within the smoke removes any type of bad spirits or any type of bad energy that's surrounding your body, right? And this is kind of a common element that we see in a lot of these kind of tribal level animistic religions, right? So in essence, every single thing in nature, whether we're looking at those trees in the background, the smoke, the grass, right? Anything that's produced by human actions, all of it has a soul and can cause real action and real effect in the world. In some South American tribes, there's still animism practiced today. What we can see here is a kind of dehydrated monkey totem that is used or is believed to contain a kind of soul or a spirit of the forest, right? And in essence, they use them during hunting rituals to kind of help boost the successfulness of their hunts. And they're also used or kind of co-opted and used in kind of death rituals as well when they send an individual off into the next world. So when we look at who tames the supernatural in essence, or who's involved, this is really referring to our religious specialists, right? And they exist within every culture, right? We have things like shamans, witches, witch doctors, clerics, priests, deacons, reverends, shamans, samans, right? There are hundreds of different names for these religious specialists that exist, right? They act as, and more importantly, they act as conduits between what we call the supernatural and the mundane, right? Between our world as humans and our daily lives and the supernatural world. They act as a connection between those two. They have the power to promote harmony, wealth, or disaster, right? Based on their ability to manipulate those supernatural forces within the religion. So it doesn't matter if we're looking at an imam or a Catholic priest or a Protestant reverend or a pagan priestess, right, or a shaman, which we see in the top right corner here and in the bottom right corner. It doesn't matter. These are all religious specialists. They act as conduits, each and every one of them, regardless whether you believe one religion is more correct or whether you faithfully believe in one religion over the other. All of them serve the same, or all of these individuals serve the same cultural function within their religion, right, is to serve as a conduit between the people that they live around, the people that they serve, and the supernatural forces, or in some cases, the deities which control the universe. So in essence, we consider religion itself a cultural universal, right? So religion, if we were to place a definition upon it, it'd be a set of beliefs based on a unique vision of how the world ought to be, right? So it's often revealed through insights into supernatural power, and it's lived out. Religion is lived out within the community, right? Every religion has behavioral mandates or behavioral suggestions that allow people to kind of live more harmoniously with in their own communities based on belief. There are common elements or themes that we see in all religions, whether we're looking at the animism that's practiced amongst the Yanomamo people in Venezuela and Brazil, or we're looking at a Catholic priest operating out of the Vatican in Italy. All common religions have these common themes, right? There's always a belief in otherworldly powers or deities. There is myths that explain the origin and meaning of life. When we talked about folk tales and myths and legends, we talked a little bit about origin stories. We have ritual expression of religious beliefs, right? So there's always religion or rituals that express how that religion, what those religious beliefs are. There are symbols that represent the religion, whether you're looking at the crucifix or you're looking at the Star of David or what have you. You know, there's always a symbol that represents that religion. There are specialists that perform rituals and oversee the expression of that religion within each culture. And there are spaces designated within each culture as sacred, whether you're looking at a sacred grove for a pagan festival in Greece, or you're looking at a Protestant church, right, in the inner city of Cleveland. So if we look at some of the different elements of religions or patterns, right, we have this notion of polytheism, right? This is the belief in a pantheon of gods or goddesses, right? It's the belief that the gods control every aspect of everyday life, and it's the belief that misfortune is due to angering the gods, right? So in polytheistic religions, like the one we're most familiar with is that of ancient Greece, if you have misfortune, well, you must have done something that made the gods angry, right? If you are fortunate and you have a lot of good luck, then you must be doing something that the gods find favorable. So in religious studies, they call this notion of a pantheon being controlling daily life as this thing called incorporation, right? Just showing you here for our intensive purposes, I want you guys to see that, you know, it's not only the Greeks that had a pantheon of God, right? Also the Hindu religion has a pantheon of God. Zoroastrianism has a minor pantheon of gods. And in a lot of Native North American religions, there is a pantheon of gods, or at least a pantheon of different spiritual forces. The second kind of format of belief structure that we see is this notion of monotheism. We're all kind of familiar with this for those of us that grew up in one of kind of the major monotheistic religions. But that's the notion that there is only one creator, one deity, and one God. So this is just showing you a breakdown in terms of percentage, the number of various religions that are out there today in the world. You know, roughly 21% of religious individuals in the world are Muslim, 13.2% are Hindu, about 17% Catholic, about 12% non-religious. About 12% accommodating other religions, right? So it's kind of interesting. You know, Karl Marx tried to say that as science would increase, that religion should decrease. But clearly, you know, in our age of modern technology, modern science, religion has not decreased, right? It still serves a very important function within modern cultures. So religions are both, in essence, universal as well as local, right? They're expressed cross-culturally based on the rules outlined for that religion, but if you also look at its expression locally, it may vary quite a bit, right? If we look at an example, we have Pentecostal Christianity, which is practiced all over the world, but only some local groups in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Virginia practice the Pentecostal snake dancing. And don't worry, there's a video. So local religious expressions take or work to incorporate local cultural values into religious practices. Your book uses a couple of examples, like the Muslim saint shrine as well as Anna's healing room, and we'll look at each of these in a little more detail. So if we look at the Muslim saint shrine called Husain Tekri, it's the worship of saints, is generally not part of Islam as a major part of the religion, but is a carryover of a time when Hindu and Islam came into contact in this particular geographic area. So the shrine canonizes the martyred grandson of Muhammad, claiming that he is a saint, right? So it practices rituals which are not part of traditional Islam, but when you go there, they will tell you that they are part or they follow the religion of Islam. So what we're seeing here is that certain elements of Husain Tekri, or the shrine there, or their practices, mirror that of the kind of major religion, Islam, but there's also elements, or there's difference or variation in how that Islamic religion is expressed locally within that shrine itself. One of the rituals that's practiced at Husain Tekri that's not practiced in Islam in general is the walking on hot coals, which is done to kind of purify oneself and to kind of show that they are being protected by Allah, right? This is showing you another kind of amalgamation that we see between a Islamic kind of religious center as well as a Hindu shrine, right? So this is kind of showing you that kind of blending of two religions in which that, they belong to the primary religion, which is Islam, but the expression of it is quite different locally. So if we look at the functions of Husain Tekri, it's visited by people of many faiths. It's not just visited by Islamic individuals. It's also visited by Christians as well as people of the Hindu religion. Ceremonies of the shrine are meant to heal the spirit and body, right? So people attend to relieve financial trouble, heal the sick, or seek spiritual guidance from the religious specialists that live and work at the shrine. Another variation of expression locally of a major religion is the kind of Pentecostal Christianity, or those snake dancers from West Virginia. And for the next kind of, I'm going to show you a few videos throughout the kind of course of this lecture, and I think it's important that you take the time to watch each of the videos, right? Because it's important not just to hear about culture, not just to hear about these various expressions of religious practices, but it's important to see it as well. So the Pentecostal snake dancers themselves are found in the kind of Appalachia area of the eastern United States, places, parts of Virginia, Pennsylvania, as well as West Virginia. It's the belief that the purity of one's soul protects them from these venomous snakes. So these are the people who dance with rattlesnakes and cottonmouth snakes and other kind of North American poisonous serpents. And when you watch the video, you're going to see them. There's frenzied dances with these snakes, and they are speaking in tongues as well. So this is just part of a different expression of Pentecostal Christianity that exists within certain sectors of the United States. If we look at another example of kind of various expression or local expression of a major religion, we have Amma's Healing Room. And Amma's Healing Room is in Hyderabad, India, and is an example of supernatural practices with cross-religious boundaries, right? So people of many faiths come to and see Amma for her healing amulets. And Amma's practices exemplify the diversity of expression we see in religious practices. So in essence, what Amma uses is the spiritual figures of that person's religion to craft her healing amulets, right? So in essence, what she's doing is kind of being versatile in terms of how she makes these kind of totems that she uses for healing, right? It depends on the person who's visiting and what their faith is, as what she uses for the amulet. I kind of throw witchcraft in here because there's a big misnomer cross-culturally about what witchcraft really is. It's kind of a blanket or umbrella term. Witchcraft itself is not a religion, right? There's no kind of defined major source of witchcraft that everyone practices. In essence, witchcraft is kind of a blanket term for a lot of smaller religions and a whole variety of kind of shamanistic and variations of expression. One that I tend to look at, which I find interesting, is this witchcraft practice in southern Africa, where they hunt down albinos, human albinos, and end up hacking off their limbs and drying them out and grinding them up for powders. And this practice still occurs today. So people who are born with albinism in southern and eastern Africa have to be very careful because they're always constantly a target, right? Witch doctors and people who practice witchcraft will pay large sums of money in order to get access to, an albino that they can kill and use in their religious practices. So where albino hunting is the most prevalent is in the African country of Malawi. And albino people are hunted and killed for their body parts. There's usually several cases per year. And the body parts are considered potent magical objects that can be used by the witches in Malawi to either give someone a disastrous fortune or to give someone good fortune. So if we look at some of the examinations of the kind of structure of religion, we have one of our early sociologists, we've talked about him a little bit before, Emile Durkheim, and he studied kind of the unifying effect of religion, or how religion acts to unify groups of people together, right? He created this dichotomy relating to how we incorporate religion into our cultural lives, right? He noted between the sacred versus the profane, right? Sacred is relating to religious practices, or anything that relates to religious practice, right? The profane are elements of culture that are non-religious, right? So he believed, or Durkheim believed, that religion combated anomie, or the feeling of alienation a person feels when dislocated, or when social order of their culture is disrupted. So he said that, when things happen, when people are confronted against, conflict, disaster, strife, famine, things like this, Durkheim's saying that religion acts as a unifying force, right? It acts as a way to ameliorate, or to kind of alleviate those feelings of isolation that an individual may feel, right? So ritual in and of itself, according to Durkheim, was an active, or a series of acts which express a religious belief that is rational, right? That serves a specific function within culture. So in terms of, we'll look at a couple different anthropologists who have studied religion over the years. In essence, how anthropologists study religion, they seek to ascertain the meaning behind religion by studying the rituals within the religion. We're going to look at people like Audrey Richards, Mary Douglas, as well as Victor Turner. All of these individuals studied how ritual cements religious belief within communities, right? So these anthropologists focused on religion rituals within non-Western cultures known as rites of passage and pilgrimage. So Mary Douglas looked at a cross-cultural examination between African tribal religions from these African cattle tribes, like the Nuer, as well as the Maasai and a few others. And she really looked at how whether there were any similarities between westernized religion and non-westernized religion. And she noticed that Jewish dietary laws mirrored in basic rationale to the dietary laws of African cattle tribes. So in essence, what she's saying is that in certain groups, whether you're looking at the Hindu religion in India, whether you're looking at the Jewish dietary laws, or whether you're looking at the dietary laws of the African cattle tribes, these dietary laws were created for very specific cultural functions. In some cases, they were created to diminish disease, or to respond to diseases that were occurring in the past. In some cases, they were created because draft animals were far too important, or that particular animal was far too important, so it was made sacred as a way to prevent the individuals from eating that animal en masse. So each of these anthropologists covered what we would call or consider different types of rituals. And there are different categories of rituals. You have hortatory rituals, which are kind of your trance or vision quests. Of course, you have your rites of passage, which we've talked about a little bit. These denotes the life stages of an individual. Remember, this is that separation, liminality, and reincorporation. We have rituals of intensification. These are the cyclic rituals evolving or revolving around seasons, right? And then, of course, you have syncretic rituals, which are rituals that develop from blended religions, right? That's what I mentioned in the very first slide, is when two major religions come together and a third one is formed out of that meeting, then we refer to it as a syncretic religion, and along with that comes a whole series of syncretic rituals as well. So hortatory rituals, on a very basic sense, are exhortations to the god or gods to perform a specific act, right? This would be you praying to be given a sign for some particular woe or problem that you're having in your life. Trances are sometimes induced to contact the supernatural using hallucinogenic drugs. We have a couple examples of these, like the Tarianas people who use ayahuasca, which is a highly poisonous and hallucinogenic material in Brazil. It's actually a concoction of several different plants. And then you have the Chichimeca from Mexico, who ingest peyote as a form of as a way to cause a hallucinogenic trance. So if we look at ayahuasca as an example, right? Ayahuasca generally kind of roughly translates in a lot of Amazonian languages to communing with the spirits, right? It's used by roughly 100 different groups in South America. It's used to induce a trance state, and it is an extreme purgative. It will cause you to vomit and have horrible, horrible diarrhea. It'll cause thymic dysregulation, where you start having horrible swings in your temperature, where you start sweating or you start shivering very rapidly. It's actually not a very pleasant substance to drink, but it does cause very, very vivid and very long-sustaining hallucinations. So the ayahuasca plant itself comes from the ayahuasca vine, Banisteriopsis capi, and the leaves from the shrub Psychotria viridis. And it's a day-long ritual process to make the purgative drink. They usually get up around dawn and start boiling the vine down and combining the ingredients, and they need to kind of sit and kind of steep and stew for an entire day. The drink itself, once it's done, causes rapid bodily temperature change, hallucinations, as well as vomiting and diarrhea. It's very dangerous for those who are not accustomed to its effects. There are more major religions that, apart from kind of our tribal groups in the Amazon, that use ayahuasca on a regular basis as part of a ritual. One of the large religions is called Santo Daime. And interestingly enough, this is a religion that is a syncretic religion itself, right? So it's a blended religion, right? It combines elements of Christianity as well as elements of indigenous religions from Central and South America. It's found in South America, Central America, and the United States. But it originated in northern Brazil, right, with a guy named Mestre Iranu, right? He was the kind of first Santo Daime shaman, right? So what they were doing is they created this religion that incorporated both the kind of Christians within the country in Brazil, and also incorporated the indigenous people as well, right? So it was, this kind of goes to show you the kind of unifying force that religion has. The sun dances are a hortatory ritual that occur among various tribes in native North America. They're primarily found among plains groups like the Arapaho, the Sioux, the Blackfoot, the Lakota, and a few others. It's a hortatory ritual celebrating self-sacrifice. And we'll take a look at the Arapaho Sundance ceremony, but in essence, this is basically where you go out and you tie yourself to a pole and you dance around the pole without eating or drinking for several days until you have a hallucination. So the Arapaho Sundance itself lasted 7 days, with the last 4 days being dedicated to dancing around the sun pole, which is a part of their sacred rituals. It required the dancers to stare at the sun while dancing with the skin pierced, attaching them to the sun pole. So in essence, what's going on here is they take these bone hooks, they pierce the flesh of their chest, and they tie those bone hooks to the pole, and they lean back so that it's nice and tight. And then they dance around the pole in the sun all at the same time while staring at the sun until they become so over-inundated with pain and exhaustion that they begin to hallucinate, right? If the dancer does not show signs of pain, they will be rewarded with a vision from the Great Spirit, right? So for the Arapaho, the sun dance itself represents the struggles of life. So the Arapaho sun dances stopped, in essence, they stopped building their sacred circles and erecting the sacred Sundance pole because the Sundance itself required a ritual specialist known as the holder of the sacred wheel. And in the 1930s, the last Arapaho specialist died without passing the sacred wheel or the knowledge on how to do this ritual successfully to a successor. So in essence, the practice stopped once that individual passed away. So one of the contributions that Victor Turner made in the field of kind of religious anthropology, or the anthropology of religion, was this notion of the transitions between life stages, right? He argued that it was part of cultural identity formation, and we've talked about this before. There are 3 important stages within all rites of passage, right? The first stage being separation, where the initiate is removed from regular society. The next stage being liminality, where it's an intermediate period where they start the ritual process but have not completed it, right? So they're no longer a member of their society because they've started the process, Usually we look at this in terms of going from being a child to an adult. So they're no longer a child because they've started the ritual process, but they're not yet an adult because they haven't finished the ritual process. So, and then you have reincorporation, where the initiate is brought back as a full member of society, and upon completion, initiates are considered full members of the culture or group. So if we look at one of our rites of passage that we see across the world, we have the Pentecost Islanders, who practice a very interesting form of rite of passage for teenage boys to become men. The boys will jump from 98-foot tall wooden towers. Sometimes they're about 40 feet tall. It really just depends on how tall they can get it. The vines are tied to the feet, and the first jump acts as an initiation ritual. Upon the first jump, their mother, who is standing by, discards and breaks a little clay idol representing her son's childhood, right? So in essence, when they make that first jump, the mother, they are no longer a child because they've made the jump, but they're not an adult yet because they have not completed it successfully. Once they complete it successfully, the kind of final stage is the mother smashing that clay idol. Once that idol is smashed, they are now considered full adults or full men within the tribe. And I'll tell you, the kind of dangerousness of this is pretty severe, right? These are vines that they're using. They're not bungee cords, right? And so if you don't calculate the length of the vine correctly, you're going to either smash into the tower or you're going to smash into the ground. The whole goal was to just have their back or their top of their head brush the ground very lightly. So if we look at it in terms of Victor Turner's stages, right, the separation is the boys are sequestered the night before their first jump. The liminality period is the moment of the jump. And the reincorporation is completing the jump, the idol is smashed, and they are becoming a full-fledged adult. If we look at another rite of passage, we have the Harmar cow jumpers, which is an African cattle tribe. And the boys are expected to jump across the cows naked, right? They wear cords across their chests, which are discarded after the ceremony. As a matter of fact, one of the elder men in the tribe will, upon their first successful run, essentially going across the cows, one of the older men of the tribe will come and bite the cord off of the individual, right? And biting that cord signifies that they are now an adult, right? Once they are complete, they are known as Maza within the tribe, or men of regard. So if we look at a different set of rituals, we have rites of intensification. These are also known as cyclic rituals or seasonal rituals, generally related to kind of agricultural produce, right? They're always communal, and sometimes they can occur at times of crisis, right? They can mark the request for a good harvest, as well as celebrate the kind of release of cultural expectations and role reversal. And we'll look at a few rites of intensification here. If we look at one festival or one rite of intensification that occurs, we have the Festival of Holi, which occurs in India, which is celebrated among Hindus. It marks the start of spring, right? So there's that seasonal aspect or cyclic aspect. It involves complete role reversals, right? So lower caste men will fling colored powders and animal dung and water on upper class men. People who are considered normally submissive people are supposed to act boisterous and loud and fling powders, and people who are normally loud and boisterous are supposed to act submissive. It's this kind of notion of reversal of roles, reversal of cultural expectations on individuals. So Karl Marx wrote a little bit about religion, and he famously said that kind of religion is the opiate of the masses, right? And what he really meant by this was not necessarily that religion, dulls people or that it makes people stupid. What he was really saying is that religion is used to heal people, right? It's used to bring people together to kind of heal social ills. But he believed that, kind of a underside or kind of a downside to that unifying effect was that, well, when you use religion as a mask for inequality, or you use it to mask material inequality within a society, right? So really, as a unifying force, yes, it unifies people, but it also works to mask inequality at the same time. Marx also believed that as science and technology expanded, the need for religion would also decrease, right? And we've seen, based on some of the world population charts and the kind of number and sheer variety of religions that exist, right, that simply isn't the case. So Marx was not correct in that assertion. So another anthropologist that looked at religious practices and their intersection with kind of cultural materialism was Marvin Harris, and he studied the religious behaviors of various cultures kind of in a cross-cultural comparative perspective. He looked at Polynesian groups, Jewish religions, the Muslim religion or Islam, and African religions as well. Harris asserted that religious practices originated as responses to material needs like food, right? So an example would be Hindus have a religious prohibition against eating cows because the cow is too important economically to use as food. What he referred to this was kind of the notion of cultural materialism, right? That material conditions, including technology, dictate the social organization within the culture. And he even expanded that to say, well, it's really the material conditions and your technology that dictate what type of religion that you have in a particular area or a particular culture. If we look at another social researcher who looked at religion extensively, we have Max Weber, and he proposed an evolutionary schema for religion, basically saying that religion or traditional religion is led by shamans, then you move or evolve into a charismatic religion, which is led by prophets, and then in the kind of third or final evolutionary stage for religions, you have a rational religion with institutions and formally trained religious spiritual leaders, right? But this falls victim to the same kind of criticisms that Elman Service's schema fell victim to, that Lewis Henry Morgan's schema fell victim to. It's placing these categorical boxes around a very diverse subject, right? So, yes, we talk about it. Yes, it's kind of useful in terms of looking at maybe how religions may have developed, but it's not mutually, these categories are not mutually exclusive, nor are they the end all for a specific religion. If we look at shamanism, these are religious specialists in many tribe and band level societies, right? So shamans are conduits to the supernatural. They are able to manipulate the material world through the use of rituals and special abilities, right? Shamans will also commune with gods and deities, and kind of a unique example that we see are the female shamans of Korea that you see featured here to the right. One of the things we like to address in anthropology in terms of religion, when we look at religion and culture, in Western society, in particular in America, we've kind of gotten this notion that religion and science are at odds with one another, and that they're looking to kind of destroy one another, right? So the question really is are they really at odds, right? Is it a kind of magic versus science situation? And can there be such a thing as a scientist and someone who's religious, right? There's actually someone that can help us and inform us on this particular topic, a gentleman named Stephen Jay Gould. So Stephen Jay Gould, who's an evolutionary scientist as well as a biologist, says he calls what this kind of debate between religion and science something called non-overlapping magisteria, or non-overlapping areas of authority, right? So religion and science seek to kind of address different things within a society. They seek to kind of solve or kind of ameliorate different societal woes, right? So it's kind of in the same sense that you can be a sportsman as well as a musician, or you can be a scientist and a theologian, right? One being one does not exclude the other, right? So science and religion are not, and this is coming from someone who teaches evolution on a college level. Science and religion are not at odds with one another. So in a lot of religions, we look at something, this concept known as magic, right? It's based on the belief that there's a link between the natural and supernatural worlds, right? So attempting to compel the supernatural to act in desired ways by performing a spell or other acts, whether it's a prayer, a spell, or whether you're sticking pins in a voodoo doll, right? All of this kind of counts as religious magic, right? We have a couple different forms of magic. Two in particular, we have imitative magic versus contagious magic. Imitative magic is a ritual which achieves efficacy by imitating the outcome desired, right? So you can think about it like manipulating a doll or a puppet. And then you have contagious magic, which is magic conveyed from person to person by some sort of connection, right? So you get some sort of object from that person, whether it's their toenail clippings or whether it's their hair, something that symbolizes them, and you are able to manipulate or affect some sort of change in their lives based on conducting magic on that object that you obtained, right? An example of this would be in E. Evans Pritchard's work amongst the Azande. The Azande believed curses and magic were psychic and no rituals or tools were necessarily used, right? All you needed was a personal object from that person. So, two anthropologists that have looked at the intersection of religion as a system of power are Clifford Geertz and Talal Asad, right? And they examine how religion and power operate within a particular culture, right? And if we look at Geertz, he says that religious symbols imbue people with power, right, to move beyond the mundane, and religious symbols give them secret knowledge or access to a secret reality, right, that only they know about. You can think about it as the robes that a priest or a shaman may wear, the kind of crucifix, or I personally come from a Catholic background, and in Catholicism, there's a lot of pomp and circumstance and ritual that goes into an average mass ceremony, right? So in essence, the kind of using the gilded crosses and the large candles, all of those act as symbols which help those individuals, the people who wield them, have secret power. If you look at Assad, right, he would say that religious symbols are expressions of power given by people, right? So essentially, the people who believe in that religion imbue those symbols with power. So kind of to go a little bit further into detail about Assad's kind of notion, he refers to this as kind of authorizing process, right? It's the historical process by which symbols are given power within a culture. And of course, we base this off of a Boasian historical particularism, right? Each culture has its own authorizing process, which gives symbols within that culture power. So Assad argues that we cannot really define religion. Any conceptualization of a universal definition to religion would be culturally marred by the power systems and the kind of authorizing process within our own culture. So what Assad is really saying is that we can't really say that something, we have no right to say something is religion versus not a religion, right? Beliefs are beliefs. There is also a large intersection in many cultures between religion and health, right? So many religious organizations also control health assets. An example of this would be Christian-run hospitals and health organizations in Swaziland, which is a small African monarchy, right? And Swaziland has high rates of HIV and AIDS infections as well. So religion can also serve a function in other sectors of society, not just in a spiritual aspect. So far we've talked about kind of distinct religions that exist kind of and operate on their own, but what really happens when you have two religions that come together, usually in a colonial context, and people are kind of forced to either choose between those two religions or to create something new? Well, when religions come into contact, there can be kind of a blending of religions. This is known as syncretism, right, or syncretic religions. Usually the less powerful religion is kind of incorporates elements of the more dominant religion. This is a process that's known as internalization, and the resulting blended religion is known as a syncretic religion. And the example that I like to use here is this is a church that's in Central America, and you can see here kind of your classic wedding ceremony that's going on. But the church has some syncretic elements, right? It has that kind of grotto cave-like structure in the very front there. This is a very, very kind of very, very important aspect in a lot of indigenous religions in Central America, right? Because caves act as portals to the supernatural and portals to the underworld. As well as in a lot of indigenous religions in Central America, you have the Tree of Life, and it's generally represented as a large tree. There's usually a cross section here, but they've kind of artistically done that with all of the various ones coming out. But it's very similar to a crucifix, right? And you can even see a little crucifix kind of down in the back there. But as you can see, this shows you that there are a lot of different elements. There are elements of the indigenous religion, and there are also elements of the major religion, which was Catholicism, that contacted this area during the colonial times when Spain owned Mexico. So another aspect of religion that anthropologists look at very closely is kind of how death is treated in different cultures. Almost every human culture have death rites, right? They could be a single ritual, or they could be cyclic rituals that occur every year. Death rites are used to give families closure, as well as provide a mechanism to create a memorial for the deceased individual so that they exist eternally within the culture. If we look at just a few kind of different death burial rituals real quick, we have the Tibetan celestial sky burials. This could involve ritual dissection, where the body is cut up into pieces, or sometimes the body is left whole. 80% of Tibetan monks today choose sky burials, and Buddhism does not believe in the preservation of the body, right? So this is what permits for this kind of extreme ritual. And a Tibetan celestial sky burial, just to give you a clue on what it is essentially they toss the body, or the pieces of the body, out onto kind of a mountain surface, and they allow vultures and other birds of prey to come and pick the remains clean, and they just leave them there, right? So it essentially creates these large bone fields. We have the suspension burials of the Bo people, which was more commonly practiced in ancient times. It's no longer practiced anymore. This is in southwest China, and the bodies are placed in a coffin and suspended on a cliffside, right? So the Bo people are still around today in very, very small numbers, primarily because they were almost completely massacred around 700 years ago by the Ming Dynasty. So if we look at the Sati of India, this is a practice that's really no longer practiced anymore, but it's the notion of voluntarily lighting oneself on fire, right? It's practiced amongst recent widows in India. It's the kind of basic rationale was to kind of keep couples faithful to one another, and it was brought to an end by kind of the British colonialism period. We also have the practice of ritual finger amputation as kind of a response to the familial death. It's practiced amongst the Dani of New Guinea. Fingers of women and children, relatives of the deceased, are amputated, right? So in essence, what this is that the live women and children relatives amputate parts of their fingers when a relative dies, right? The fingers are dried, burned, and then stored in a special urn, right? So today, in the New Guinea nation state, although this is still practiced amongst kind of remote tribal groups, in New Guinea, the nation state, it's outlawed. We also have the practice of Famarihana amongst the Malagasy people of Madagascar. This is a cyclic ritual every year in which the burials are dug up and rewrapped. It involves kind of a big to-do parade. And the rationale for this is it's done to hasten decomposition. There's actually a very functional reason why the Malagasy practice this, right? Madagascar itself is an island. It's kind of a small country, and they don't have a lot of room to bury people, right? And they don't practice sea burials. So in essence, this is done to hasten that composition so that room can be made available for new deceased individuals. We also have scaffold burials that are practiced amongst the Blackfoot and the Cheyenne people of the Midwest. It's no longer practiced today, but it's, in essence, a scaffold is erected on the side of a cliff or within a tree. And it's a similar rationale to Tibetan monks because they believe that once the body is gone, that there's really no reason to preserve the body. The spirit is already out. And there's also a big kind of cultural taboo to going to these areas once the scaffold's been constructed and the deceased individual is there decaying. You wouldn't go back because you would be afraid if you were a Blackfoot or a Cheyenne or a Sioux, you would be afraid of that person's ghost attaching itself to you and coming back with you. We also have jar burials in Cambodia, which is extraordinarily rare today cross-culturally. As a matter of fact, jar burials were fairly common in a few different cultures. We have cultures in South America at the mouth of the Amazon River that practice jar burials. You also have people in Southeast Asia practicing jar burials. In Cambodia, they were practiced by Angkorian monks, and in essence, the bones were defleshed prior to the burial, so all of the flesh was taken off. And the jars were then kind of sealed and stored in caves, right? The practice started around the 15th century, and it's pretty much non-existent today. It pretty much stopped in the mid-17th century. So to kind of wrap everything up, be sure you review the various case studies illustrating the varying nature of religion cross-culturally. Be sure to review the section on globalization and religion, including religious revitalization movements. Be sure to reread the chapter, right? It's a very information-dense chapter, and I urge you all, if you haven't watched the videos that were presented in this lecture, please go back and watch them. They're important, as well as watch the video that's posted along with this lecture.